as you've undoubtedly noticed, there's a lot of confusion about what capitalism is. And I like the term for reasons I'll explain, and I'm not willing to give it up. I'd be happy to give it up if that's the only way we can make progress. I'm not wedded to it in some sense, but I like it. I think of capitalism, well, imagine this scenario. Somebody comes up to you and says, you know, I hate chicken. You go, well, to each his own. Why don't you like it? Well, I don't like it because of all the meat is brown, and the animal that it comes from moos, and it's got this hoof, and it chews grass. And at some point you realize, I think you're not sure what a chicken is, actually, and how it's distinguished from a cow, right? So you want to kind of clarify to the person. I feel this way when people talk about capitalism. A lot of times. They talk about capitalism. Well, what's wrong with capitalism? Well, it's a system by which the rich exploit the poor and get bailed out, you know, as it happened in 2008. Or it brings war to people. It steals property from the poor and exploits people. It excludes women and minorities. And you just want to say, well, hold on, and stop right there. Are you talking about the current system, or are you talking about actual capitalism? Because those are very different things. When I speak about capitalism, I'm not talking about bailouts, I'm not talking about war, I'm not talking about exploitation and exclusion. I'm talking about a system, a social system. I don't even like the word system. I like to think of it as an emergent order that's rooted in two fundamental principles: free association and the private ownership of property. And that's it. There's no more to it than that. You can associate with whom you want on any terms that you want, and the property that you're exchanging with others is yours, and you're free to trade it. That's it. That's how I define capitalism. So you might ask, well, in light of that, why don't we call it something else? I mean, why don't you call it the exchange economy? I'm okay with that. That's good. Call it the exchange economy. Or free enterprise if you want, or just really society, which is really all it is. The reason we call it capitalism is because of that word capital. Capital is a very specific thing, and the economics literature is exactly right about this. Capital is the produced products, is the production of products designed not for consumption, but for further production. That's all capital really means. It means that you're busy making things not to be immediately consumed, but which are designed to make other things and produce other things so that you can have an extended order of production. That's what makes possible the division of labor. And my friends, capital is absolutely and empirically and historically essential to growing prosperity. Without capital, we would not be able to feed 8 billion people. Without capital, we would not have doubled the lifespan in the last 100 years. Without capital, the world would be unrecognizable as it is today. So capital is an absolutely essential institution, and that's why I like the term capitalism to describe the exchange economy, because this institution is really great. Lots of people are friendly to the idea of exchange and peaceful association, but somehow don't get it through their heads that you have to have capital in order to have prosperity. You go to any poor country in the world, what do you observe? You see people who are creative, hardworking, sometimes ridiculously hardworking, much harder working than all of us in this room. They're trading a lot, they're exchanging a lot, there are markets everywhere. Why isn't wealth happening? Why aren't they getting rich? It's because of the absence of capital. Because every time somebody begins to accumulate capital and invest it over the long term, some other jerk comes along and loots it. That's basically it. It could be a private party, a private criminal gang, or it could be a public official. Very little difference, actually, for the most part these days. Whatever it is that's attacking capital, they're attacking the fundamentals of prosperity. So that's what I mean by capitalism. If by capitalism you mean something else, then I would like to change the term. Because that's all it really comes down to. Yes, the history of capitalism has been replete with privileges for the elites. Corporations have long been linked up with government to do bad things. There have been a terrible history of government and business working together in the name of capitalism. I don't consider that capitalism. I consider it somebody else. There are many terms you could call it. Crony capitalism is one term thrown around. I don't much like the term crony capitalism because It's not capitalism. So just because you add the word crony to it doesn't, that's a very strange usage. I actually prefer the term fascism to describe non-capitalistic, non-socialistic systems. So it's not total socialism, but it's not capitalism either. Fascism, it sounds like I'm cursing, like, oh, it's a fascist, right? It sounds like a bad word. Actually, this is a system. It's a real system that was invented in the 1920s. It had a huge influence all over world economies. It was tried in Italy, tried in the US, tried in the UK, tried in Germany, tried in Spain, and still the remnants of it are still with us today. I'd like to get rid of those remnants, but I think that's the best term to describe what people call today a mixed economy. So where does capitalism come from? And I think this is an extremely important thing for us to think through. So I'd like to use just a few minutes, and I'm sad about how little time we have together, but I would like to just use a few minutes to tell you a little bit of a conjectural history of the origin of exchange. And I think it'll help you understand something about why we have to have private property and why we have to have free association and exchange in order to have prosperity. And the history I'm about to tell is not entirely conjectural. It actually is the same story that anthropologists have told us from their research actually really happened. And the story is this. There's a small tribe of people, and they have needs, just like we have, and it's food, clothing, and shelter. Shelter's not that big a problem. If you find a good cave, it can last for generations. Even clothing's not dreadful if you're willing to wear animal skins. Those can last for many years. It's not a daily thing. You don't have to constantly create clothes. But food, now that's another matter. That's something we need every single day. It's terrible. It's oppressive. It's the worst thing that happens. This is why this is the Valley of Tears, the Lacrimal Valley, because every day we're going to need food. It's one of the great ironies to me today that capitalism has given us the problem of obesity. I mean, first world problem, right? I mean, come on. Most all of human history has been afflicted by an absence of food. But it wasn't always always that way. Anthropologists have told us there's certain spots in the world and certain tribes in which food was readily available just because it was granted to us by nature. So imagine a small tribe, and there's plenty of things around to eat. So every tree had lots of berries on it. There are lots of slow-moving animals. You can't catch the fast ones because you don't have cars or bikes or anything like that. So you've got to have slow-moving animals like goats or turtles are ideal, and they lay eggs, and So there's plenty of food for everybody, and there's no reason to have anything like a systematic sense of private property under those conditions, because there doesn't seem to be scarcity. There's enough to go around. But inevitably, in this community like this, where everybody's being well fed, there's a lot of reproduction, and the population begins to grow. And what develops is what's called the tragedy of the commons. Since there's no private property, there's no distinction between mine and thine, people begin to consume too much and take more than they probably should relative to the needs of the whole community. It happens very quickly once people see the food supply begin to diminish. There's a massive raid on it, and it all goes away. And anthropologists have told us this story. This is what happens. So you wake up one day and you're like, there's no food, and I'm pretty darn hungry. What am I going to do? You have to look out further for food and further for food. But in this community, there's one guy. He's Bob the Caveman. I don't know what his name is. But he figures out that, this whole idea of living hand to mouth and hunting and gathering and foraging out for these relatively disgusting tasting leaves on the ground and these bugs, I'm sick of them. I'm going to capture some goats and put them near my cave and encourage them to reproduce. And from them, I will get milk and meat, and I will see them multiply. And that way I can provide for my family. But in so doing, you have to kind of fence them in and domesticate them. This is the origin of the domestication of animals. And it works. Suddenly, Bob the Caveman is wealthier than anybody else around him. So how do his neighbors respond to this, looking over and seeing this guy with goats, enjoying fabulous butter and milk, every single morning, and wearing very cool goat skins and eating big goat legs every night, Now, there are two ways you can respond to this. You can hate his guts, and say he's got too much, and that's evil, and I envy him, and let's gang up on him and kill him and steal his goats. And you might do that several times, right? Until at some point, somebody figures out, you know, rather than just attacking him and hating him, why don't we learn from him and become friends with him? So this is an entrepreneur. So somebody else says, you know, he's got goats, but he doesn't have a lot of vegetables. Maybe I'll raise some vegetables. So he too fences in a small area outside of his cave and begins to grow things and discovers that he can trade. This is Jim, the caveman, is now trading with Bob, the caveman, and they've got a burgeoning economy. And pretty soon everybody learns, listen, we've got to have a system of ownership around here, because if we do that, we can cooperate together and generate real wealth. That's amazing. That's a great insight. People ask what's the greatest invention in history? Private property. That's the best invention that anybody ever came up with. It's a technology. It's a technology that generates wealth and leads to human association. And with that comes, for the first time in this world of scarcity, the origin of affection that people have for each other. Suddenly, Jim sees Bob as valuable, and Bob sees Jim as valuable. That alone is amazing. It's something that you and I experience every single day, and it never fails to inspire me. Every single exchange that I engage in my daily life inspires me. The reason is somewhat mystical and magical. Because if you think about it, Jim has his vegetables, Bob has his goats. They come together, trades a goat for a big bunch of vegetables. They go apart. One says thank you, the other one says thank you. They are both better off than they were before. They are both wealthier than they are before. Because Bob had a goat that he values less than Jim's vegetables. Jim had vegetables he values less than Bob's goat. So they make a switch. Nothing has changed about the physical world, but something else has dramatically changed. It's internal. It's something about the human heart and the human mind that has changed. You feel and believe yourself better off than you were before. That is a form of wealth creation. That's the first form of wealth creation. It happens without any change in the physical availability of goods and services. It happens because there's a change in the human heart. That's extraordinary. And this goes on in our lives every single day, all day. It happened to me this morning when I bought a cup of coffee at the hotel, a perfect stranger. That's just true. It's Grand Rapids. Everybody's nice to everybody, right? But beyond that, we have a special relationship with each other because I'm giving of my property. I looked at the $2 in my wallet and I said, I value this, but I'd even value a cup of coffee more. And he's looking at my $2 and he's thinking, that looks pretty good. I like this cup of coffee, but I even value that $2 more than my cup of coffee. So we arrange this deal. Just looking at each other's eyes, we see a chance for us to get together and develop a temporary little association in which our lives are made better off. That's a beautiful thing. It happens all the time. Happens every day, happens trillions of times a day. That's what exchange is all about. It's about seeing value in what other people have and arranging in voluntary terms a way to enhance our lives, to make our lives better off. Therefore, increase the wealth in the community. Again, without any physical change in the surroundings. That is the generation of value. And that's amazing, and it's beautiful. And we take it for granted so much, and it's pathetic. We shouldn't. We should walk around every day with a sense of growing ever wealthier because of the chance to engage other people in exchange. I think it's a very beautiful and magical institution. And by the way I just described it, the exchange, maybe it sounds very simple to you. It apparently is not, because the ancient philosophers seem to miss it. They all, like even Aristotle, when he writes about exchange, he sees it as just being like a zero-sum game. You know, you trade one thing for another. Everybody's moving stuff around. He thinks that all exchanges consist of equals for equals. Well, I have some stuff, you have some stuff. If we exchange, just because they're equal. You know, this is just a fallacy. And you know, we love Aristotle. He was a very smart guy. But he missed this point. It's not about equality. It's about inequality. We have unequal valuations. It's just that they're reversed. The coffee and the $2 are not the same. The coffee is more valuable to me than it was to him, and my $2 are more valuable to him than it was to me. So it's precisely because we have unequal valuations of our respective property that the exchange takes place at all. Aristotle missed this point. This is extremely important because, you know, actually opponents of the market economy tend to look at all the market activity that goes on every day in the financial markets, or they look at malls, or they look at Walmart, they look at big commercial districts, and they're just disgusted. They look at it and they go, look at all that. What are these people doing? They're just running around, spending stuff, greedy things, you know, materialism, they're grasping for money, desperate for food, whatever. They're just mortified by it, and they're disgusted, you know? They're looking at the same things we look at, but they have a totally different impression of it. And the reason is that they don't understand that there's something about the act of exchange itself that is wealth generating. That every exchange that takes place, at least people believe that they're going to get more value out of that exchange after it happens than if it never happens at all. That's, I think, a big difference between the people who have fallen in love with capitalism, as I have, as versus those who haven't.